In this chapter, we want to figure out what is the current status quo of your company and how far are you away from reaching your business goal. Let's imagine you want to get profitable. Then you need to track your customer acquisition costs as well as your customer lifetime value. Let's have a look at this chart. Unfortunately, you start with a very high value for the customer acquisition costs at the beginning. And then hopefully over time you can lower the customer acquisition costs to a minimum. Why are the customer acquisition costs that high at the beginning? Very often you do this on purpose. That means you want to learn with your first pilot customers. So you talk to them to figure out what they want, what the product features should look like, what marketing and sales channels are working and which ones maybe not. So that's why you spend a lot of money and time to talk to the first customers. So that means customer acquisition costs very high. But even if you want to lower the customer acquisition cost in an early stage, it's tricky because your product is not perfect yet, and maybe also your marketing and sales team is not really knowing what channels are working the best, and the brand recognition might be low so far and so forth. That means over time you need to improve your product features, you need to improve your campaigns for marketing and sales and so on and so forth, and this normally works, so that's why the customer acquisition cost goes down over time. In an ideal world, the customer acquisition costs might be even zero in the future. One option is that you have maybe this viral wonder case, meaning everyone is telling their friends or their network that your products and features are really amazing, and that's why the customer acquisition costs are going to zero because you don't need to pay anything for that. But unfortunately, this is very, very rare. The second scenario where the customer acquisition cost minimum might be zero is if you find a sales partner and or a traffic partner. They normally provide new customers via their marketing and sales channels, and then afterwards they want to share the revenues. That means you get the customers in the first step for free, but you need to share the revenues. That means the customer lifetime value will go down. But the customer acquisition cost in theory is zero in that case. Unfortunately, in an early stage, it's not so easy to convince traffic partners and sales partners because they are normally big companies, successful companies, and you are new in the market. So it's harder to convince them to work with you together in that early stage. Maybe in later stages, it's more likely. So let's look at the customer lifetime value. Here it is the other way around. Normally you start with a value of zero because the first customers do not need to pay anything, or you give them a high discount. That means the customer lifetime value is at the beginning, unfortunately, very low. Over time, you can normally increase the customer lifetime value because your product gets better, so maybe people stay longer and pay more in total, or you develop new products so you get additional revenues, or you can increase the price and or the margin and so on and so forth. So that's why normally it should be easy to increase the customer lifetime value over time. There will be a maximum value for the customer lifetime value in the future, so that's the maximum amount and average you can earn per customer. So if you want to get profitable, the point in time is interesting where both lines are crossing. So where the customer acquisition cost has the same value than the customer lifetime value. This is shown by the dotted line in the chart. On the left-hand side, if you are on the left-hand side, then it's unlikely that you can get profitable if you stay there, and on the right-hand side, there's a big chance that you might reach your goal to get profitable. So the question is how to figure out what's your status quo of your company. Where are you in the chart? So there are two options. Either you are already in the market, then you can measure all the metric values which are needed to calculate the customer acquisition cost and the lifetime value, or you are not in the market yet, which means we need to do some research what the metric values might be. Let's start with the first option. Let's imagine you're in the market and then you want to figure out your status quo. So how could you measure the metric values? What might be the data sources? So first of all, there might be internal databases. So you might have a database for your customers. So you might find out how many new customers you got last month, for example. And you can look at your bank account, you see the revenues. You might use analytics tools, tracking tools to figure out how many visitors had been on your website, how many people subscribed for your newsletter, and so on and so forth. And if you use direct sales or sales partners, then normally tools like customer relationship management tools, CRM tools might be used, where you track how many new business contacts had been contacted and or how many of them converted to a specific stage in the sales process. So if you are in the market, then normally it's easy to do that you measure all the metric values based on the internal data sources as well as the tools you're using. And the other option, if you're not in the market yet, then it's a little bit harder, but still possible. You need to figure out what might be the values of your metrics of your business model DNA. So what might be data sources? Fortunately, there are a lot of industry benchmarks for specific metrics. The question is only how to find the industry benchmarks. There are several options. One option is that you are talking to industry experts. That might be people which are working in the industry since a long time. That might be consultants in your industry. That might be professors which are more or less related to your industry, and so on and so forth, and also other startups. So you can talk to older startups which are in the same industry, and normally if you're not a direct competitor, you can normally try to get into contact with them and try to figure out whether they are nice in telling you some metric values which are in their experience the right ones for your business. But you can also start looking for research reports where people talk about exactly your metrics. Some of them are expensive, other ones not. Then there might be databases, some of them are for free, others you need to pay for. There are maybe other sources like blogs, like books, like podcasts where experts are talking about your specific business models, your industry, your conversion rates, and so on and so forth. So in my experience, it is after a while possible to identify the right data sources to get at least a rough idea what the metric values might look like. Other options are that you also do your own research via Google. You can also do surveys, and on top you can just check things out. For example, you can start a campaign in Instagram or Facebook, and then you get an idea what the cost per clicks might be, what the reach might be, and so on and so forth. So in a lot of cases, you can get a rough idea what the metric values might be. And believe me, at the very beginning, in an early stage, that's good enough to have at least a rough idea. So let's imagine you either measured the metric values or you did some research what they might be. Then you can, based on the values of your business model DNA, calculate your goal metrics, which might be the customer acquisition cost, the lifetime value, or the growth rates. A remark is, be aware of, if you calculate the customer acquisition cost, for example, for your model with 5 different marketing and sales channels, then in reality, each marketing and sales channel has its own customer acquisition cost. That means you might have 5 different customer acquisition cost values, one per channel. Yeah. In the next slides, in the next chapters, I assume that we take the weighted average of all the customer acquisition costs, and so we just look at one customer acquisition cost value, which is the weighted average. So if you are calculating the customer acquisition cost and lifetime value based on the measured values or the values you found in some industry benchmarks, then you are able to figure out your status quo. And then you might be either in a scenario where the customer acquisition cost is much higher than the lifetime value, like the two examples from the previous chapter. This is unfortunately normal in an early stage. Or you're lucky and you're already in scenario 2 where they are closer together, but unfortunately still on the left-hand side of the dotted line. And or you might be in scenario 3, which is on the right-hand side of the dotted line. So the customer acquisition cost is already lower than the lifetime value. So maybe some insights here. Even if your main focus is to get profitable, you normally stay on the left-hand side of the dotted line the first half year to 6 years. Why? Because it's not so easy to turn the two metrics around that you are able to get profitable. So it's a little bit dependent on what industry you are in, whether you have a B2C or B2B business model, and also whether you have a physical product and or you provide a software service. It depends on different aspects, but at the end, it's normal that you stay on the left-hand side for a long time. And the business models which start in scenario 3 are very rare. Normally, project-based or consulting-based models have the chance to start in scenario 3 in an early stage. But their disadvantage might be that they are not scaling as much as, for example, software-based products and services, but at least these kind of models have the chance to start on the right-hand side in an early stage. So after that chapter, you hopefully know where you currently are and or where you might start if you entering the market. So if you're in an early stage and you're not in the market yet, you at least can get an idea where you might start. A last hint for this chapter, this was an example for getting profitable. So we looked at the customer acquisition cost and the lifetime value. And if you want to look at growth, then you would do exactly the same thing, but you would not look at the customer acquisition cost and lifetime value. You would look at the number of customers and or specific growth rates and or at a specific revenue figure. So the dotted line would be your goal, like you want to reach 10,000 customers or 50,000 euros revenue per month or whatever your goal might be. And then you might be in a scenario which is before on the left-hand side of your goal, or you reached your goal already, then you're on the right-hand side of the dotted line. Please figure out where you are on this chart.